So amidst all the other things that have been happening the last few weeks, there was one event that seemed to capture the attention of a lot of Americans as well as a number of people in China, and that had to do with a giant panda. I think we all saw pictures of Beibei being transported back to China, or to China. Beibei, born 4 years ago. Of course, the National Zoo got Beibei's own private plane to travel to China under this cool agreement with China. I guess back in 1972, under the Nixon administration, there was this agreement with China that was formed that they would lend us as a form of goodwill and diplomacy and research giant pandas. And then the agreement was that any cubs that were born in America would live here 4 years and then be transported back to China to live in China. So part of this is research about how giant pandas do in a different environment. It's also some good relationship building, I guess, with China. But in that year, in 1972, when this began, China gifted a pair of giant pandas to the United States. And then another pair in the 90s as well. And Beibei was not the first of the cubs that were born. There have been 3 cubs that were born. Anybody remember when the first giant panda cub was born? This one was named Tia Shan, born in 2005. And originally, when Tia Shan was born, the zookeepers saw this baby giant panda and nicknamed it Butterstick because they said that it looked like and was about the size of a stick of butter. So they all called it Butterstick. Of course, that name did not stay or stick because that's not the proper name that this giant panda is supposed to have. I guess they have a very official naming scheme, and at 100 days after being born, the culture in China has an official naming ceremony, at least for giant pandas. I don't know about other things for people, but at least for giant pandas, they say 100 days you got to name your giant panda. So there was this whole online poll that happened to figure out what is going to be the name of this giant panda. So through this whole poll, they chose a name. Tia Shan was chosen, and that name literally means peaceful mountain. Well, then a few years later, in 2013, another giant panda cub, this time a girl, was born. This one a little more recent, so some of us have seen this one. This one earned the name Bao Bao, and Bao Bao got her name from another online poll with some names that were whittled down and chosen. And Bao Bao literally means treasure. Commonly it means baby also, but literally it means treasure. Well, then there was Beibei, born in 2015, and the first ladies of both America and China were the ones who chose from a final 2 names. They're the ones who chose the name for Beibei. So Mrs. Obama and the First Lady of China chose from this list of 2 and chose Beibei, which literally means precious or treasure. Names mean something. Parents, you remember trying to name your child? Tough stuff to name a child. I mean, so much goes into it. Like, who are they going to be? Who has God gifted them to be? What are they going to be like? What personality are they going to have? Finding a name that people aren't going to tease them about. Finding a name that they'll like someday. Finding a name that you like to call them. I mean, so much is wrapped up in choosing names. In the Bible, the same is true, but in the Bible, most of the people get their names because of what's happening around them when they're born. For example, Abraham and Sarah, way back in the beginning, they have no children. They're advanced in age to the point where they should not be having children. And most people could not have children. And God, through a messenger, came to them and said, "You will have a child." And of course, they didn't believe that at first. And what was it that Sarah did in response to that? Sarah laughed. And so they had a baby. The baby's name was Isaac, which means laugh. So many of the names that are in the Bible come from the circumstances and the events around when that baby is born. Well, Jesus was given a lot of names. And he was given a lot of names that mean a lot of things. And when we dig in, when we explore, when we investigate what these names actually mean and what's behind them, it helps us discover so many new things and a greater depth about who Jesus is and what God was doing in sending Jesus here. So whatever you think you have previously learned or understand or have come to sort of settle on about Jesus, I hope some of these names sort of rock that a little bit. That they surprise some things in us and help us see Jesus in some new ways. Not only are they just names that mean something, but there's a sense in which these are code names. And we're calling them that because there's something so much bigger behind just the name. For example, today obviously we're talking about Jesus as the Word. We know the name Word, we know the word, but what is it that's so much more behind that? What's the code that we can kind of break to figure out why is Jesus called that name? After all, names are a pretty big deal in the Bible. In the book of Philippians, Paul says, "Therefore God elevated him, Jesus, to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." Names do something, and they hold weight. So let's get cracking. The code of name number one. The Bible's book of John, which is the biography of Jesus that the disciple John wrote, did something that's totally unusual when it comes to the four biographies of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, and Luke present their Gospels in certain ways, but John is very different. In comparison to Matthew and Luke, for example, that talk about Jesus being born, John doesn't really talk about Jesus being born, the events around that happen. Compared with Mark, that starts with like a grand episode, a grand event and things that are happening, John doesn't do that either. John starts in a totally different way that starts right off with a code name. So here's how John begins. Oh, actually, in fact, the words of John are so famous that people often used to take these words and they used to write them and then hang them around their neck, like on a medallion or in a box or in some other way, because they believed that these first words of John, the introductory words to his biography, they held so much power and they held so much significance that just wearing them would ward off evil, would protect you from disease and from other things. Just those words, they felt there's something so big and so powerful. A little wacky, maybe so, but also really cool in the sense that they saw that there's something big in these words of John. So, here's how John begins. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." So John's the one who starts with philosophy and all these deep kinds of big ideas, and these big forceful things, these big words, these big ideas. And he's not just reporting events, like some of the others. He's not just saying what happened. He's not interested just in the events around Jesus. He's interested in what Jesus actually means. He's interested in the deeper things behind Jesus. There were lots of other people who were actually exploring this and trying to debate about this at the time of Jesus. There were people, on the one hand, who said that Jesus is, the Savior, the eternal, the divine, all the great big things about Jesus. And then there were people on the other side who were saying, well, no, that couldn't possibly be. Jesus was not all those big things. He was just kind of a wise teacher. He was somebody who said some smart things, but he couldn't possibly be all of that. And then you had people, of course, along the spectrum in between who said all sorts of different things between those two extremes. At the same time, there were some people, philosophers in particular, during the days of when John wrote his gospel, that were debating about some other things. And broadly in their culture, they were convinced about this really interesting idea. They were all convinced that there was some sort of a force, some sort of a thing that held all of creation, all of everything together. And it wasn't a new idea, it's just that they were really captivated by it. Way back, 600 years before the time of Jesus, there was a philosopher named Heraclitus. And he's the one who kind of coined this idea that there's like a reason or a logic or a thing or a force or a something there. Didn't know what to call it, but there's a thing there that holds everything together, that makes sense of all creation. Otherwise it would just go everywhere. But it just somehow, there's something there. They were convinced that there was something there that made sense. As we go down throughout history, Plato picked up the same idea. He debated between the reality of an object and the copy of an object. And he debated between, well, what holds all this together? What makes sense of all creation? How does this all fit? And he was convinced that there's something, but he just didn't know what to necessarily call it or name it. Around the time of Jesus, Philo of Alexandria, another philosopher and even theologian, he grabbed onto this idea. And he even took another step, and he said, no, this thing, this force, this thing that exists, that holds everything together, this powerful thing that's out there, it's here, and it's here with us. There's something that's present with us that actually does this. And it's in all this world, and all this philosophy, and all of this idea, that John steps into this, and he says, I found it. I found this thing you're looking for, and it's the Word. And that was actually the word that they used, the term that they used to describe this thing. They used the word, word. Everybody was talking about it. People were talking about, well, that word that's there, but they just didn't attach anything to it. It was just an idea, or it was a logic, or a thing. And John said, no, I know what the thing is. The Word has come. The Word, John has found that Word. And he says it in these powerful, powerful words. And he's saying that Jesus is the thing that connects God and people. Jesus is the ultimate wisdom and the ultimate logic and the things that you've all been searching for. He's the thing that governs the universe. He's the thing that's big enough and powerful enough for all things to be held together. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. From the very beginning, John says, this Word was. John makes claims that are pretty much everyone only reserved for God. When he talks about creation, that this Word was present from the beginning, was at creation. People usually only talked about creation and creative things when it came to God. So for John to say that this Word was with God, this Word was at creation, he's saying this Word is as big as anything can be. It's bigger than any idea we have. This thing is on par with God. And then he goes even further when he talks about that this Word has overcome the darkness. Because darkness, they thought, was evil. Darkness and evil were the same thing. And for something to overcome evil was like bigger than big. You didn't find that anywhere. That's what he's trying to capture. This Word, this thing, is what everybody's been searching for. It's bigger than anybody has ever found. This Word is what everybody is looking for. And then John goes farther. Because it wasn't enough to say that John just found the Word. Then John shows that the Word found us. That's his point. When he says that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The Word that he's talking about, this idea that people thought was up there, it's now here. It's as human, it's as real, it's as with us as anything has ever been. And it was a crazy idea in John's world. And it's a pretty crazy idea in our world, too. He said that the world had all the power, the Word has all the power in the universe, and was thought to be this cosmic force that was way beyond what anybody thought. And John describes this Word coming to us as flesh. When he describes it as flesh, that's kind of the word to describe human and real. And when somebody talked about flesh or called you flesh, that was not a compliment. That was not something that people aspired to be. You didn't want to be flesh. Flesh was like kind of an insult, kind of like not positive. When you said flesh, you didn't say, I'm flesh. You kind of said, you're flesh. It was not a thing that he wanted to be. But John calls him flesh because it's human, it's real, it's here, it's like us. And at the same time, what else does John call him? Refers to him as the glory. I mean, glory is like big and magnificent and divine and shining and amazing. So how can John put flesh and glory in the same person? In December, the same month of 1931, Ted and Dorothy and their son Billy were a young family. Ted had finished college. He had graduated with a degree as a pharmacist, and he worked for a couple pharmacists for a number of years, but then he realized that that's not what he wanted to do. What he really wanted was a pharmacy all his own. So he got a bequest, a gift, some money from his father, and so Tim and Dorothy and their young son Billy set out to find a new town to live in and a store that they could call their own. So they went a ways away from where they grew up and where they were, and they found a new town. It was a new town that was recently developed, had a population of 326 people. Not just 326 people, but 326 poor farmers. And they wanted to set up a pharmacy in this town. So they did, and it was a tough go at their pharmacy. It was a pharmacy where very few people came. They tried to serve their community. They tried to go out and serve other people. They tried to help other people and be generous. They tried to build relationships with their big town of 326 people, and they did, but it didn't bring in business. And so they gave themselves a goal. Their goal was 5 years. They said, if this thing doesn't fly in 5 years, we're going to close it. A couple months short of 5 years, it was a hot, miserable summer in South Dakota, in the plains of South Dakota. And they sat tending their store, watching the cars go by, not stopping at their store. Dorothy had gone outside for some air from the store, and she came back in a few minutes later, and she said, I got an idea. And her idea was, all these people are passing by because they don't need what we have. I think there is something that we do have. And that thing that we can give them is free ice water. So they made some signs, and after they did, they posted these signs up, and they put the signs out, and business started trickling in for the free ice water. And as the free ice water business came, then the sales started to come. And business started picking up. And the next year they hired 8 staff members, and the business grew into what we know today as Wall Drug. But 2 things had to happen in order for that business to work. Free and income. Free and income do not go together. Just like flesh and glory do not go together. But they had to, in order for Jesus to be who God sent him to be. He had to be totally just like us and understand everything about our lives. But he had to be perfect and magnificent and glorious, just like God is. All crammed in to Jesus. When John says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us and we beheld his glory, that's Christmas. That's Jesus coming to us in all of God's magnificence. For those of us that already know that experience of Jesus, this is a celebration. Because we get to celebrate who Jesus is, the amazing things that God has done, and the fact that he lives in us. For those of us and those we know who have not experienced this, this is what God came for us to experience. We are created to know that God came to us with this power and also with this reality, that he's just like us. So during this season, let's pray for, let's talk about, let's share, let's live out the experience that God lives with us in all of his flesh and all of his power and all of His glory too, so that others can discover this gift that God brings to us, which is Christmas. Let's pray.